Welcome to the Mindful Healers Podcast with
Dr. Jessie Mahoney
and Dr. Ni-Cheng Liang.
We are here to help you learn to pause and be present, awaken your breath, and harness the ripple effects of mindfulness for radiant health.
We get you. We know you. We are you.
We have both been successful on the surface, yet struggling underneath. We have both had cluttered brains, been overwhelmed, and exhausted.
We're healers who have found solutions and want to share them with you.
Join us here to discover a better way.
Welcome to the Mindful Healers Podcast. Today, we're going to talk about the science of mindfulness. A reminder that nothing in our episodes should be construed as medical advice. So a warm welcome back to Dr. Ellen Cooke, who is a radiation oncologist and a mindfulness teacher and founder of the Circle of Hope. She joined us a few weeks ago talking about cultivating mindful families. And today's episode came out of that conversation about her passion for sharing how and why mindfulness works. And we thought this would be a relevant conversation for all of our listeners. So our intention today is to share how and why mindfulness works and to share the science of it. And a caveat that we are a group of doctors who love science and are perhaps a little nerdy about why things work, but also knowing that sharing this helps people want to practice and be inspired to practice. We hope you will discover that mindfulness is not just a woo-woo thing to try. There is lots of data. It can help you live longer, especially if you have cancer. We also hope to share some of the facets of neuroplasticity and things like telomere length that you can take advantage of when practicing mindfulness consistently. And the takeaway from today's episode is hopefully we will ignite your curiosity and incentivize you to practice more mindfulness.
Thank you so much for having me back. And I really enjoyed our last conversation. So I'm looking forward to this one too.
So we thought we'd do this a little bit interview style and start by just asking both of you the question as to why and how does mindfulness work? And perhaps each of you can share your own passionate version of that, what you would like people to know and how it can help them. Ellen, do you want to go first?
Sure. This is one of my areas of interest. I think being a scientist, when I started practicing mindfulness, I was curious if there was actually any evidence for, whether it helps us, whether it helps cancer patients, and if it does, how that works. So I started digging into some of the research that's been done through the NIH, and really found it very interesting. So I kind of think of the mechanisms of action of mindfulness in 4 different categories. The first one being biochemical and hormonal effects on the body, which can result in different physiology. The second, neuroplasticity, which I think Dr. Liang plans to share a bunch on that. She's very passionate and interested in that topic. The third being epigenetic effects, which basically centers around telomerase and maintaining telomere length and how that protects our genetic information. And then lastly, neurofeedback, which is kind of a newer area of interest from meditation and mindfulness, but basically centers around being able to take control of certain regions of the brain. And then that can result in different biologic outcomes, different behaviors, different emotional regulation.
I just want to say that in different words and make sure this is what you were saying, but I heard hormonal and biochemical. So changing our physiology, changing the hormones we release just by practicing mindfulness. And you're saying there's evidence for that. And then changing the connections in our brain, mindfulness does that. And telomere length, I always think about like living longer. And so there's evidence that it changes our telomeres and helps us live longer. And then the neurofeedback is even taking control of parts of our brain. This is very inspiring. I hadn't really thought about it in those buckets in that way, And yet on the other end, that is sort of, you feel in control in the end, and you feel like certain parts of your brain have been awakened. And so to actually think about it changing your physiology, yoga changes your physiology too, so it makes sense. But I just hadn't really put it in those buckets before. That's essentially the short version of what you just said?
Yes.
Love
yeah.
it.
Good summary.
Yeah.
I was just going to say we can delve into each one individually, maybe. And I think that Ni Chang, when she's speaking, maybe wants to speak more on the neuroplasticity. So when we get to that section, we can delve deeper with her. So specifically, hormonal and biochemical is a really interesting category for me because there are so many studies showing that we can change the levels of certain hormones in the blood through being a regular practitioner of meditation. For instance, it increases oxytocin, which is the love hormone, and so this increases your feeling of love towards others and yourself. Second, it can regulate melatonin, which is our sleep regulating hormone. So you can get better, more restful sleep through regular meditation. Growth hormone is increased through meditation. So that is actually involved in the healing process. And I like to emphasize that with some of my patients with cancer that are going through treatment, and the body needs a lot of healing following cancer treatment. So it can help with that. It increases endorphins, which are in the bloodstream. They help us to feel good and to relieve pain. Cortisol is a big one I haven't mentioned yet. So it will decrease the stress hormone cortisol, and that helps us to regulate the stress response in the body. Dr. Liang and I taught mindfulness-based stress reduction, a course of that together at one point in time. And so that particular program has been really heavily studied and published on in the literature to show that we can reduce stress and actually just better relate to our stress through regular meditation. So those are just some of the many hormonal and biochemical changes that have been shown to be affected by our meditation practice.
Hand to heart also increases oxytocin, and hugs also decrease cortisol. So as Omicron cases decrease, perhaps being intentional about including hugs, mindful hugs in one's life has also benefits.
And I often teach in yoga, you can give yourself a hug if you don't have anyone else accessible or available. And same with hand to heart, you can do that for yourself. And encouraging people that mindfulness is clearly something one can do for themselves as well. And it strikes me as, we're all physicians, but there is some purpose here in maybe prescribing mindfulness or prescribing it to yourself as, you're recovering from surgery or having sleep issues. So many teens have trouble with sleep issues and kids have trouble with sleep issues. And I used to always get the question about melatonin. And yet now it's maybe mindfulness could be helpful in a similar way, or perhaps both. But what a beautiful way to be able to take care of yourself in that way. And I know we were going to do a future episode on pain, but I love the idea of the endorphins and pain sensors and how I know that there's been a lot of research on pain and mindfulness. And the last thing I just wanted to bring up is the idea of doing an MBSR class. And I think we talk about it, which is mindfulness-based stress reduction, but there's so many health benefits. I think everyone wants a pill to fix something, but mindfulness can be equally powerful to a pill, as can the breath. And to encourage people to consider doing some formal mindfulness training in whatever way works for them. And I'm hopeful that both of you ladies will teach again, because I heard such great reviews of that class. So hopefully at some point we'll do that again, and maybe even combining with coaching again, because that was really fun.
Yeah, as you were speaking, I realized I forgot to mention serotonin. And so, meditation does increase serotonin, which a lot of people have heard of as involved in mood regulation. But serotonin has, like many other important roles, it also is involved in the immune response. So, sometimes when patients are on treatment for cancer, they're getting immunotherapy. now. And so my thought is, well, if you can increase serotonin through meditation, then it can help make a more robust immune response. That potentially makes that treatment more effective. I can't remember what it was you said, Jesse, but a second ago, you mentioned something that triggered my memory of this study that was done, that it showed that increased serotonin in laboratory studies can actually cause apoptosis of certain cancer cells, which means cell death of these cells. Specifically, this was in Burkitt's lymphoma cells, but it was really interesting lab research that may translate eventually into the clinic.
It was probably about prescribing mindfulness as a, and not like a technical written prescription, but we used to talk about prescribing nature in pediatrics and how it can help with so many behavioral things, and it can help with eating issues, and it can help with mood disorders. And so mindfulness strikes me as similar. And you can do it in nature too, if you want the double effect. So tell us more about, I want to hear about the epigenetics and the telomeres and what happens there.
Oh, yeah. Okay. This is a really interesting area to me. So I know of a researcher named Dr. Linda Carlson. I believe she's in Canada, but she has done a lot of research in breast cancer and how the impact of starting a meditation practice can affect the survival in breast cancer. And she was also really heavily involved in creating a mindfulness-based cancer program. So anyway, let me kind of do a little summary of the science here. So we have chromosomes in our cells that are capped with telomeres at the end. And these are basically just repeating segments of DNA that don't hold any essential information. And really their sole purpose is just to be present there to protect the gene information that's further up on the chromosome. So every time our cell divides, we lose a little bit from the end of the telomere. So it's okay to lose telomere, but the closer you get to gene, the actual gene function, then the cell becomes more at risk. So what they've shown is that through practicing meditation, you can increase the enzyme telomerase, which is an enzyme that maintains those telomere lengths so that we have longer, more luscious telomeres to protect our gene information. So Linda Carlson is somebody who's done some of this work. She showed that meditation increased telomerase in patients with cancer, and that they were then able to maintain telomere length through treatment. There's another researcher named Lavretsky who showed that if you meditate for 12 minutes a day for 8 weeks, then your telomerase levels increase by 43%. So, a pretty drastic increase. And so why do we care about this? We have evidence from some other publications that overall survival is impacted by telomere length. So the longer the telomeres, the more likely you are to survive a longer period of time. And then in addition, this one study I'm referencing, which we can put in the show notes if you want, it also showed that disease-specific survival is improved with longer telomeres. So specifically, they mentioned heart disease and cancer, that patients who have been diagnosed with these things may live longer with longer telomeres.
As a cancer survivor, I'm like, yes.
Woohoo! Good information to have, right?
Tell us a little more about the neurofeedback and how we take control of certain parts of our brain. That seems like a powerful tool and something that actually our next, it'll be a past episode now. We did an episode on mindfulness in teens, and I'm thinking that my teenager would love the fact that it would allow him to take control of certain parts of his brain. It just seems like something that that sort of age range would really find exciting.
So there was a group, Korea is the main author on this, that studied a type of meditation called Interreceptive Meditation. And this is basically paying attention to your internal body cues, and the state of the internal body. And by doing this, you can learn to control certain areas of the brain that then feed into your emotions and behaviors. And they were able to confirm this by the use of a type of study called a functional MRI. So they can show, using an MRI scan, what parts of the brain are active and teach you to be able to activate those intentionally. I think it has really interesting implication for future research, especially, in mental health. I feel like it could be very, very important for that.
Well, and so interesting because I often work with physicians who, so many of us stopped listening to our internal cues. We were taught to not listen to our internal cues, even such as, needing to sleep, needing to eat, feeling sick, needing to use the restroom. And so we've been completely turned off from that. And we're sort of told not to feel also in much of our medical training. And so reconnecting with that mindfulness is a really useful tool to figuring out how you feel again and to figure out what your body needs and to listen to your body. And it strikes me that as something we've talked about in several recent episodes about eating and exercise and knowing what your body needs, that mindfulness is that tool that helps you be able to listen.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that at least right now, it's kind of early on in that area of research, but it does seem very promising. And I've heard that they're actually researching more into treatment of stroke with neurofeedback as well. So, yeah, I really want to hear what Dr. Liang has to say about neuroplasticity. She seems, before we started the recording, seems to be very passionate on this topic.
So I always give a little bit of the neuroscience in my talks for mindfulness, partly because it's really cool to show functional brain MRI imaging in your slides. They're really, really beautiful. And it's really compelling in terms of recognizing that our brain is capable of so much change, like for the better. And that's where mindfulness has been shown to invoke our brain's capacity for change, which is neuroplasticity. So a lot of the literature has basically shown that the brain regions involved in regulation of attention, emotion, self-awareness, and pain perception are the ones that are affected. And just to like rattle off those anatomic sites, we have the anterior cingulate cortex, prefrontal cortex, the medial prefrontal cortex, the posterior cingulate cortex, the striatum, and the insula. And probably one of the most popular neuroanatomic sites that have been referenced with regards to how mindfulness affects the brain has been the amygdala. So the part of the brain very responsible for the fight or flight response and perception has been implicated. And so I'm just going to delve right in that interestingly, the brain regions for attention have been shown to change with mindfulness, but whether or not those changes actually are related to improved attentional performance is a little bit more conflicting. Though I will say from a personal perspective, and very biased, of course, because it is my personal perspective, that I definitely think that it helps with attentional performance, especially in my own practice of medicine. With regards to emotional regulation, so we know that mindfulness helps decrease the physiologic reactivity and helps us faster return to our kind of homeostatic emotional baseline after a stressor. And this has been conferred with people who report that they feel like their emotional regulation is improved. And it also helps with processing cognitive control mechanisms like decreasing activity in the amygdala. So we know that what mindfulness helps train us to do, which is present moment awareness and non-judgmental acceptance, are crucial in improving our cognitive control. And there's incidentally a pretty big dose response. So the more you practice, the more a lot of these kind of positive benefits come about. But interestingly, with the amygdala literature that I've found fascinating is that holds true for kind of beginning novice meditators. But once you reach experienced meditator levels, like to the level of like a monk, for instance, that amygdala data is actually less consistent. So it definitely changes even our brain. So mindfulness changes our brains even in different ways, dependent upon how many minutes we practice cumulatively over time. With regards to pain, so just reminding everyone that mindfulness based stress reduction was originally taught back in 1979 by its creator, John Kabat-Zinn, for chronic pain patients. And so there's a lot of literature about looking at how pain is processed and how the brain perceives pain, and it basically helps improve pain processing. So there's um, support for decreased perception of pain. So not necessarily fixing any type of neuroanatomy or neurologic causes of pain, but the perception of pain can be changed at the level of how the brain perceives the pain through mindfulness. And then self awareness is one of the key components of practicing mindfulness, and that can be certainly honed and developed. And it's been shown to basically help with self awareness. I wanted to delve a little bit into how the actual brain changes with neuroplasticity, and there are these different mechanisms with dendritic branching, synaptogenesis, myelinogenesis, and even in adults, some neurogenesis. And then, as Ellen had mentioned, the brain's effects on the nervous system being one of the main parts of the nervous system. There's the autonomic regulation between the parasympathetic and the sympathetic, and can help with kind of preservation of our own neurons themselves. And so the global amount of brain changes that can come about with mindfulness can lead to the overall global decrease physiologically down to the cellular level in terms of how there is a stress reduction response. A lot of this framework comes from the breadth of literature that's been published through one of the most oftenly cited articles in the medical literature. So we will include that in the show notes, but it's by Tang et al. In 2015. It's been published in Nature Reviews Neuroscience, and it's been cited over 2,100 times. So we'll definitely be sure to include that in the show notes for everyone. So I wanted to just summarize with kind of two of the different schools of thought in terms of how mindfulness works on the brain. There's a top-down approach where the self-awareness of when a human being is faced with the stressor, rather than immediately activating the amygdala, the prefrontal cortex can kind of come online shortly after that activation to bring about the self-awareness, to bring in the mindfulness tools that are learned. So it can attenuate kind of that more primitive reptilian brain's propensity to jump to fight or flight response. And then from a different mechanistic perspective, there's this term called bottom-up approach, where the hypothalamic pituitary axis, or the one that's very responsible for how humans respond to stress, along with the sympathetic adrenal cortex axis, mindfulness meditation can directly mediate those axes to actually prevent the frank activation of those pathways. So all of this is like super fascinating to me because there's a lot about the mechanisms of action, albeit that there is this thought that it's still in its infancy in terms of how mindfulness works, but there's certainly been a lot published already. So in conclusion, basically mindfulness has the capacity to really carve out new channels in the stream beds of the mind. And that's a direct quote from Richardson and Begley.
And those stream beds can impact all the things downstream. So the hormones, your life experience, your eating habits, your sleep habits, how long you live, how well you fight cancer. I don't like the word fight, how well you change your response to cancer, all of those things. And as you mentioned, just how we react to stress and how we react to unexpected things and how we modulate our emotions and move through the world. And so it's almost like releasing the dam and allowing all those stream beds to fill with delicious water that as we all know, it's very needed. Love that visual. Shall we end with some reflection questions?
Yeah. So after learning about all of that, how can you notice what comes up for you? Like, what is actually coming up for you after learning all of that? And then with this knowledge, can you use it to inspire a recommitment to consistent daily mindfulness practice? And then finally, what's one concrete step that you can take to recommit to daily mindfulness practice, whether it's informal or formal practice?
I have one question inspired by those questions. Is there any science about how to help us commit to the practice or take the first step or continue to practice? Or ideally, is there something in mindfulness that helps you want to keep doing it? Do either of you know? Have there been any studies on that?
I think that draws upon habit formation. Mm-hmm. And wanting to create new habits. And so there's some neuroscience definitely from Judd Brewer's work, particularly in addiction medicine, about changing specific quote unquote bad habits and nurturing and fostering new habits. But ultimately, lifestyle changes are really difficult for humans to integrate. Our bodies don't usually like change, but when we set the intention for change for the better, that is step number one towards taking action.
Absolutely. I thought of that as well immediately when you asked that question. All of the data in habits and habit formation. One thing I was particularly thinking of is in order to grow my own personal mindfulness meditation practice, I had read at the time a book that talked about this cue, routine, reward triangle. And so what can help is to have a certain cue that reminds you it's now time to practice. Like for me, I like to do it first thing in the morning. So getting a hot cup of coffee when I get up is my cue to sit down and practice mindfulness. And then it becomes routine to follow that cue with the habit that you're trying to achieve. And then the reward aspect, I think, is what a lot of people are missing. Like when you first start trying to practice more regular meditation or more consistent meditation, you don't always notice benefits right away. And I think that is sometimes where people fall off. So I set some kind of funky goal for myself, and it really helped me. I actually tracked how many, I set a goal of meditating like 67% of the days of the first year that I practiced meditation. And I tracked it on a little counter. And then I said, if I reach that goal, then I'm going to have a reward, like go to the spa and get a massage or get a pedicure or something like that. But it was something I could look forward to say that, look, I achieved this, and it was a big accomplishment because it was a complete overhaul in my lifestyle. So that is what I would say is, you might want to read like Atomic Habits, or another book that I really loved about habit formation was Switch. I can't remember the author off the top of my head, but that book was really interesting, and they delve into the science behind forming a habit that is positive for you.
I also think what came up for me today is what was in one of Ni Chang's questions, which is just inspiration. And so when you come at something rather than as a to-do, but by the inspiration of the potential health benefits and the inspiration of the long-term impact, that makes it much easier to get started and just do the first step. And as we always say, start by starting. So if you enjoyed today's episode, we would love it if you would follow us and share it with others who might be interested in the science of mindfulness. We would love to teach some of you some mindfulness at our Mindful Healers retreat this summer in Green Gulch. We'll be practicing a lot of these tools, and that can be your way to get started if you don't have a formal practice, or if you want to continue to grow it and be inspired by practicing mindfulness in community in a beautiful, beautiful location. And we would also love it if you stayed on after the sound of the singing bell to enjoy yet another mindfulness practice with Dr. Ellen Cooke.
Thank you so much for being with us today, Ellen.
Yeah, thank you for having me back.
As always, if you want to declutter your mind, be more present, and start truly living your one wild and precious life, come find us at the mindfulhealerspodcast.com.
Work with one of us.
Work with both of us.
Start or up-level your mindfulness practice.
Discover how mindful coaching can change your life.
Or even better, do both as part of our Mindful Healers programs and retreats. You can find links to find out more about our programs and join our communities at themindfulhealerspodcast.com.
Reach out and get started on your journey to a life better lived today.
The content of this podcast is not meant to be medical or life advice. If you choose to participate in our mindful moments, please do so safely.
All right, so to go along with our science theme today, I thought I'd lead a short mindful breathwork exercise. And I'll explain to you as we go some of the benefits of these two breath practices. So I invite you to either close your eyes or just lower your gaze in front of you. And then turn your attention inward to notice the breath. Not changing anything about it right now, just noticing the natural rate and rhythm of your breathing. And then notice the point in the body where you feel the air movement the most strongly. And just hold your attention on that spot for a few breaths. So the first mindful breath I'd like to practice is a 4-7-8 breath. So the purpose of this breath is in knowing that we extend the exhale for longer than the inhale, we're actually able to activate the parasympathetic nervous system. And this activation is something that calms us and helps to counteract the stress response. So to do a 4-7-8 breath, you breathe into the count of 4, hold the breath to the count of 7, and then breathe out to the count of 8. So just do a few of these 4-7-8 breaths on your own. And then the second type of breath I'd like to teach you about is a box breath. And this is a breath that's actually used by the Navy SEALs in their training and in their work in the world to help counteract the stress response. So in this breath, you can imagine a box shape, and each side of the box is 4 counts. So you breathe into the count of 4, going up the side of the box, hold the breath to the count of 4, going across the box. Breathe out to the count of 4, going down the side. And then hold the exhale to the count of 4 to complete the square. So let's do some of those on our own. And then as you feel ready, you can just return to your natural rate of breathing. And then taking a deep breath in through the nose. As you exhale, you can open your eyes or raise your gaze. I'd also like to suggest that one way that you can incorporate these mindful breaths into your everyday living is by using a technique that we teach in the MBSR program called STOP. So STOP it's an acronym, it stands for stop, take a breath, observe, and then proceed. So it's something that you can use in a moment of stress. As soon as you notice that you're feeling stress, you stop. You can do one of these breath work practices. I find the 4-7-8 breath to be very helpful because I know that has been shown to activate the calming part of our nervous system. So you could do a 4-7-8 breath and then just observe your feelings before you move on. So I hope you found that helpful today, and thank you for joining us, and see you next time, I hope.